Hi, this is Maggie. We're going to continue our conversation about text processing by rewriting an earlier example using some string functionality we haven't discussed yet. In an earlier video, which I'll link here and in the description, we created an array list of user-defined objects by reading object data in text form from a file. In our earlier code, called Proverb ArrayList Client, the data for each object was spread out over multiple lines, basically one field per line. We made an assumption that the records would be complete, and we had not yet discussed exception handling, so our program would throw an exception if a file weren't configured properly. I have here a copy of the program, which I've renamed to Proverb String Processing, and will rewrite the program so that it can read a file of data in which each line contains all of the data for a single object. Here is an example of the text file we're going to read. The file is called proverbs1line.txt, and it is 5 lines long. Each line contains 3 pieces of information separated or delimited by forward slashes. For example, the last line contains first the proverb, "There is no believing a liar even when he speaks the truth," then a forward slash, then the start of the proverb, "There is no believing a liar," then a forward slash, and then the origin of the proverb, Greek. This is for a game in which players are given a prompt, such as "there is an old Greek proverb," and then they are told the start of the proverb, "There is no believing a liar," and they must complete the proverb and try to fool the other players into believing their proverb is the correct one. Now, why are there forward slashes between the different elements of the proverb? We are going to use the delimiter character to break the line into the pieces that we need. So we need to choose a character that won't be contained in the data. I couldn't use a comma, for example, because you can see that the comma is used in many of the proverbs. A forward slash seems an unlikely character to be in a proverb, so we're using that. There is another consideration as well. We can't use a character that's a meta character in regular expressions, and we'll talk more about that in a minute. Now our old program, you can see, checks if the file exists on line 16, creates a scanner to read from the file, and then reads 3 lines at a time, the proverb, the beginning of the proverb, and the origin of the proverb, all originally on separate lines. So let's rewrite this so that we just create the file and the scanner in a try-catch block. And instead of reading 3 lines and sending each of those strings to the constructor for the proverb, we'll read 1 line. Okay, so I have just one string variable proverb line, and I've put a try block around creating the file and scanner objects and reading lines from the file in a loop. I catch a file not found exception right now with just a message that something went wrong with the file. I've commented out the line of code in which we create a proverb object because we need to separate the string proverb line that we've read from the file into the 3 pieces we need to instantiate a proverb object. And for that, we'll use the string class's split method. Here's the string class documentation for the split method with 1 argument. There is also a 2-argument version. The argument is called regex, short for regular expression. If we are splitting on a delimiter character, we can pass in the delimiter character as our regular expression, as long as that delimiter character doesn't have special meaning in a regular expression. We'll talk about more complicated regular expressions in another video. For now, here is the Oracle documentation for the pattern class, which is part of Java's regular expression processing, and you can see the characters that have special meaning, such as the backslash, the caret, square brackets, dashes, a period, curly braces, a $sign, a plus sign, and more. It is difficult to choose a delimiter that doesn't have special meaning in regular expressions. Notice that the split method returns an array of string objects. These will be the strings that result when the string is split into pieces using the parameter as a delimiter. For our strings, which are delimited with the forward slash, the result will be an array with 3 elements. piece before the first slash, the piece between the two slashes, and the piece after the second slash. So the first piece will be the proverb, the second the prompt, and the third the origin. Let's try this in our code. First, let's make sure we're reading the new text file. Now we'll write, after we read the string from the file, proverb pieces equals proverb line.split, open paren, and we'll pass in a string composed of the forward slash. Above, we'll declare proverb pieces to be an array of string. Now, in our constructor, we can pass in the elements of that array. Proverb pieces sub 0 in the place of the proverb, proverb pieces sub 1 in place of the prompt, and proverb pieces sub 2 in place of the origin. Now, if any one line isn't configured correctly, there is the possibility of an array index out of bounds exception. So let's catch that as well with a message that the file isn't configured correctly. And when we run the program, we get the expected output. There is an old origin proverb, followed by the proverb for each line in the file. And let's just throw a breakpoint in after we split the proverb so you can see the array and run it again in the debugger. And you can see in the variables area, if we open up proverb pieces, that the pieces are the parts of the string between the delimiters. String manipulation is a part of any application that processes text or uses text to interact with a human user, which is a lot of applications. It's important to know how to use the different string manipulation tools at your disposal. There is a practice exercise in the description of this video that will allow you to program the string splitting part of this program. I recommend you practice with the exercise, then rewrite this program yourself in Eclipse and try your own string splitting project. Once you can do that, you're ready to move on.